They sold all Chinese girls at auction. Only one was left, until a widower rancher offered his name. The wind moved slowly across the wide, dry land, carrying dust and the smell of horses and old wood.
Brace. The small frontier town sat at the edge of the world, or at least that was how it felt to those who lived there. Wooden buildings leaned slightly with age, and the streets were packed with people who had come for the same reason. Some came out of curiosity, some out of need, and others out of loneliness they did not speak about. The last young Chinese girl stood near the edge of the crowded square. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her, her fingers cold even under the warm sun. She did not understand most of the words being spoken around her, but she understood enough to know that her future was being decided by strangers. Her name was Mei Lin, though no one here bothered to ask for it. To them, she was just the last one. She had traveled farther than she ever imagined she would in her short life. The journey had begun with promises. A man had come to her village and spoken of work, of safe homes, of chances to build a new life. Her family had little, and she had wanted to help them. She remembered her mother's hands holding her face, her father standing silent in the doorway, trying to look strong. She had believed she would return one day with money and stories of a better world. But the world she found was not the one she had been promised. The ship ride across the ocean had been long and frightening. The air below the deck was thick, and the nights were full of crying and whispered prayers. When she finally stepped onto land, everything felt too loud, too fast, and too strange. The language, the faces, the way people looked at her as if she did not belong anywhere at all. Bay. Now she stood in this dusty town, far from the sea, far from home, watching as one by one the others were taken away. Some left with people who spoke kindly. Others went with people who barely looked at them. Mei Lin did not know which was worse. Across the square, a man sat on his horse, watching the scene unfold. His name was Thomas Hale, though most people in town just called him the rancher. He was a widower, a man shaped by years of hard work and quiet nights. His face was lined by the sun and by memories he did not share. He had not come to the town looking for anything in particular. He had come for supplies, maybe a new rope or nails for a broken fence. But when he heard the noise, he had followed it. Thomas did not like crowds. He preferred the open land, where the sky stretched wide and the only sounds were the wind and the low calls of cattle. The town made him uneasy. Too many eyes, too many voices. Still, something had pulled him closer to the square. He saw the men gathered around, the way they talked and laughed, the way they pointed. He saw the girls standing in a line, their shoulders tight, their faces trying not to show fear. His jaw tightened, though he wasn't sure why. He told himself it was none of his business. The world was full of things that were not his business. Then he saw Mei Lin. She stood slightly apart from the others, her head lowered but her eyes lifted just enough to watch the people in front of her. There was something in her expression that made him pause. It wasn't just fear. It was a kind of quiet strength, like someone holding on to the last piece of themselves in a place that kept trying to take it away. Thomas shifted in his saddle. He thought of his ranch, of the empty house that waited for him at the end of every long day. He thought of his late wife, Anna, and the way her laughter used to fill the kitchen. After she passed, the house had grown silent, and so had he. He had learned to live with the quiet, or at least he thought he had. In the square, voices rose as another girl was taken away. The crowd thinned. People began to drift off, satisfied or disappointed, depending on what they had come for. Soon, Only a few remained. Maylin realized she was alone. Her heart began to beat faster. She did not know what it meant to be left behind, but she knew it could not be good. She had seen the way people looked at her, the way they spoke about her as if she were not there. Breath. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to feel smaller, trying to disappear. The man who had been running the event looked annoyed. He rubbed his hands together and glanced around as if hoping someone would change their mind. "Anyone!" he called out, his voice sharp in the open air. "Do He told himself to turn away. He told himself he had no place in this. He had a ranch to run, fences to fix, cattle to move. He had a life that, while quiet, was already full of responsibility, but his horse did not move. He looked at Maylin again. She met his eyes for just a moment before looking away. That brief glance felt heavier than it should have. He thought of how alone she must be, standing in a land where everything was unfamiliar, where no one spoke her language, where no one called her by her name. Without fully deciding to, Thomas guided his horse forward. The sound of hooves on the dirt drew attention. A few people turned, surprised. The man in charge straightened, hope flashing across his face. Thomas cleared his throat. "Pay." His voice came out rough, unused to being heard in a crowd. "I'll take her," he said. The words hung in the air. Maylin did not understand the sentence, but she understood the way the people looked at her now. She understood the way the man on the horse was pointing gently in her direction. Fear and confusion mixed inside her, but there was also something else. A small spark of curiosity. The man in charge quickly agreed, eager to be done. Papers were brought out. Thomas signed his name, his hand steady even though his thoughts were not. He had no idea what he was truly agreeing to. He only knew that he could not leave her there. As things were settled, Thomas dismounted and walked toward Maylin. Up close, he noticed how small she was, how young. He saw the dirt on her shoes, the tear in the sleeve of her dress. He felt a sudden sharp need to protect her, though he did not know her at all. He tried to speak slowly, carefully. "My name is Thomas," he said, pointing to himself. Maylin hesitated, then pointed to herself. "Maylin?" she said softly. He repeated it, his accent heavy, but his effort clear.
Beck. Maylin. For the first time since arriving in the town, she allowed herself a small, uncertain smile. The journey to the ranch was quiet.
Bye. Maylin rode on a wagon, holding onto the wooden side as the land stretched out before her. She had never seen so much open space. The sky felt bigger than anything she had known. The air smelled clean, like grass and earth instead of smoke and sweat. Thomas rode beside her, glancing over now and then to make sure she was all right. He did not know how to talk to her. He did not know what she had been through. He only knew that he had brought a stranger into his already fragile world. As the ranch came into view, Maylin felt a mix of fear and hope. The house was simple, surrounded by fields and fences that seemed to go on forever. It did not look like the places she had been taken before. It looked quiet. It looked still. Thomas helped her down from the wagon. He gestured toward the house. "Home," he said, though he wasn't sure what the word meant anymore. Maylin looked at the building, then back at him. She did not understand the word, but she understood the tone. Pet. It was gentle. It was careful. As they stood there, two strangers from different worlds, the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the land in warm colors. Neither of them knew what the future would hold. Bet. Neither of them knew how their lives were about to change. But for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt completely alone. The first night at the ranch felt longer than any night Mei-Lin could remember. The sky outside the small house grew dark and wide, filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside, the rooms were quiet, broken only by the soft creak of wood and the distant sounds of animals settling for sleep. Everything felt unfamiliar, and yet, for the first time in many days, nothing felt threatening. Thomas moved carefully around the house, unsure of where to stand or what to do. He lit a lantern and placed it on the table, its warm glow filling the room with gentle light. Breath. He could feel Mei-Lin watching him from the corner of her eye, just as he kept glancing back to make sure she was still there. They were like two people trying to cross a river without knowing where the stones were. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit," he said softly, lowering himself into another seat to show her what he meant. Mei-Lin nodded and sat, her hands resting on her knees. She took in every detail of the room. The simple table, the old photographs on the wall, the small window that showed only darkness beyond the glass. It was not a grand place, but it felt real. It felt like a space someone actually lived in, not a place meant to pass people through. Thomas went to the stove and began to prepare a simple meal. He moved with slow confidence, the kind that came from years of doing the same small tasks every day. He boiled water, added some dried vegetables and meat, and stirred the pot. The smell of warm food filled the room. Mei-Lin's stomach tightened. Breath. She realized how hungry she was. When the food was ready, Thomas placed a bowl in front of her. He hesitated, then offered her a spoon. She looked at it for a moment, then took it with a small nod of thanks. They ate, in silence. The quiet was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy with things neither of them could say. Thomas watched as Mei-Lin took careful bites, as if she was afraid the food might disappear if she wasn't careful. After they finished, he pointed down a short hallway. "You can sleep there," he said, showing her a small room with a narrow bed and a folded blanket. Mei-Lin stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft compared to what she had known before. She touched the blanket, feeling its warmth. When she looked up, Thomas was still standing in the doorway, unsure if he should leave or stay. She gave him a small bow of her head, a simple way to say thank you. He nodded back and quietly closed the door. That night, neither of them slept much. Mei-Lin lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind drifted back to her home, to the sound of her mother's voice, to the smell of cooking rice, to the feeling of being safe in a place where she understood everything around her. Tears slipped down the sides of her face, but she did not make a sound. In the other room, Thomas sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. He thought of Anna. Desk. He thought of how she used to sit in that same spot, humming softly while she sewed. He wondered what she would think if she could see him now, bringing a stranger into their home, trying to do something he did not fully understand himself. Morning came slowly, painted in soft light that slipped through the windows. The sounds of the ranch woke Mei-Lin. Birds called out, and somewhere nearby a horse stamped its hoof against the ground. She stepped outside and felt the cool air on her face. The land stretched out in every direction, open and quiet. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest feel tight. Thomas was already up, working near the barn. He saw her and lifted a hand in greeting. "Morning," he said. even though he knew she might not understand. She smiled anyway. The days that followed were filled with small moments and slow progress. Thomas showed Maylin how to feed the chickens, how to carry water from the well, how to sweep the porch. He spoke simply, using his hands and expressions when words failed him. Maylin watched carefully and learned quickly. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to show that she belonged here, even if she still did not know what here truly meant. Sometimes they laughed at their mistakes. Once Thomas tried to show her how to milk a cow and ended up with milk splashing onto his boots instead of into the bucket. Maylin covered her mouth, trying not to laugh, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. Thomas couldn't help but smile. Not everything was easy. There were moments when silence returned, heavy and uncertain. There were times when Maylin would suddenly grow quiet, her thoughts far away. Bay. Thomas did not push her to speak. He knew what it was like to carry memories that were too heavy for words. One afternoon, they went into town together to buy supplies. Maylin walked close to Thomas, her eyes down, feeling the stares of people as they passed. Whispers floated through the air. Some people looked curious. Others looked unkind. Thomas noticed. His jaw tightened, and he placed himself slightly in front of her, as if his presence alone could block the world. At the store, the man behind the counter raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," he said. Thomas kept his voice calm. "Just here for flour and sugar." The man glanced at Maylin but said nothing more. On the way back, Maylin finally spoke. "Burse. Why you?" she asked slowly, searching for the right words. "Bay." Thomas looked at her, surprised. He thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he admitted.
It felt wrong to leave you there." She nodded, as if she understood more than he realized. That evening, Maylin cooked a simple meal using what she remembered from home.
The taste was different, the ingredients unfamiliar, but the effort was clear. Thomas ate every bite, even though it wasn't what he was used to. "This is good," he said. Her smile in response was brighter than the lantern on the table. As days turned into weeks, something began to change between them. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was in the way Thomas would leave an extra blanket near her door at night. It was in the way Maylin would leave a cup of water by his chair after a long day in the sun. They began to learn each other's rhythms. Thomas woke early and worked until the light faded.
Maylin found comfort in routine, in knowing what each day would bring. One afternoon, a storm rolled in.
Dark clouds filled the sky and thunder echoed across the land. Maylin had never seen a storm like this before, but the wind howled and rain beat against the roof. She stood in the doorway, unsure. Thomas noticed her fear and gently guided her inside. They sat at the table as the storm raged around them. He told her stories, simple ones about the ranch, about Anna, about the land. Maylin listened, even when she did not understand every word. The sound of his voice was enough. When the storm passed, the air felt fresh and clean. The world seemed new again. That night, Maylin wrote her name in the dirt outside with a stick. She looked at it for a long time, then added Thomas's name beside it. The letters were uneven, but the meaning felt strong. Inside the house, Thomas found one of Anna's old scarves folded neatly on the table. He picked it up and held it for a moment before placing it back down. He felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. like something old was finally making room for something new. Neither of them spoke about the future. They didn't need to. For now, it was enough to wake up each day and face it together. But beyond the wide fields and quiet skies, the town still existed, and with it, the whispers, the questions, and the past that neither of them could fully leave behind. They didn't know it yet, but the fragile peace they were building would soon be tested. The change came on a quiet morning, the kind that felt too calm to be real. Bah. The sun rose slowly, spreading soft light over the fields and fences. The air was cool, and the grass still held drops of dew that sparkled like tiny stars. Maylin stood on the porch, watching Thomas mend a broken section of the fence near the barn. She had grown used to these mornings. Narration, the steady rhythm of work, the peaceful silence, the simple life that had begun to feel almost safe. But that morning something felt different. She could not explain it, but her chest felt tight, as if the wind carried a warning she did not yet understand. Thomas finished tying the last piece of wire and wiped his hands on his pants. Bay. He looked up and saw her watching him. He gave her a small wave, and she waved back. They shared a quiet smile, one that had become familiar and comforting. Later that day, Thomas decided to ride into town to sell a small group of cattle. The ranch needed supplies, and he needed the money. He usually went alone, but this time, Maylin asked to come. "Bess, I see," she said carefully. Thomas hesitated. He knew the town was not always kind, but he also knew she couldn't hide from the world forever. "All right," he said. "Stay close." They traveled together under the wide sky, the road dusty and long. Maylin held onto the side of the wagon, her eyes taking in everything. The closer they got to town, the more nervous she felt. The memory of standing alone in the square returned to her, sharp and cold. When they arrived, the town was busy. Best. People moved from shop to shop, voices filling the air. Some recognized Thomas and nodded to him. Others noticed Maylin and whispered to each other. They went to the market first. Thomas spoke with a buyer, discussing prices and weights. Maylin stood nearby, her hands folded, trying to stay invisible. That was when she saw him. The man stood near the edge of the crowd, watching her. His face was one she recognized. He was the same man who had been in charge of the square on the day she was left behind. His eyes narrowed slightly when he saw her standing beside Thomas. Maylin's heart began to race. The man walked closer, his steps slow and sure. "Didn't think I'd see her again," he said to Thomas, his tone casual but sharp. Thomas turned, his body stiffening. "She's with me now." The man smirked. "That's so. Funny how things turn out." Maylin did not understand every word, but she understood the feeling behind them. She felt like a shadow from her past had reached out and found her again. Thomas stepped slightly in front of her. "Best. We're just here to do business," he said. "No trouble." The man raised his hands. "No trouble. Just surprised." But as he walked away, he glanced back once more, and the look in his eyes made Maylin's stomach twist. The rest of the trip passed in uneasy silence. On the ride home, Maylin stared at the road, her thoughts spinning. She felt like the fragile world she and Thomas had built was not as protected as she believed. That night, a knock came at the door. Thomas opened it to find two men standing on the porch. One was the man from the market, Narration. The other was someone Thomas did not recognize. "Evening," the man said. "Mind if we talk?" Thomas did not like the tone, but he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Maylin stood just inside, her ear pressed close to the wood. "We heard you took in someone who might not belong out here," the man said. "She belongs where I say she belongs," Thomas replied. The other man shifted his weight. "There are people who might be interested in her, people who pay well." Thomas felt his anger rise, hot and sudden.
"She's not for sale," he said firmly. The men exchanged a look. "Just thought you should know," the first one said. "Not everyone in town is happy about your choice." They left without another word.
Thomas stood on the porch for a long time after they were gone, staring into the dark. He felt the weight of what had just happened settle on his shoulders, but he had known, deep down, that trouble might follow. He just hadn't expected it so soon. Inside, Maylin waited, her eyes wide with worry. She didn't ask what had been said, for she didn't need to. She could see it in his face. Bait. For the first time since coming to the ranch, she felt truly afraid. The next few days were tense. Thomas kept a closer watch on the land. He checked the fences more often. He made sure the doors and windows were locked at night. Maylin noticed the change. She tried to help, to stay close, but the fear in the air was hard to ignore. The quiet that once felt peaceful now felt heavy and watchful. One afternoon, while Thomas was out riding the far side of the property, Maylin heard voices near the barn. Her heart jumped. She peeked around the corner and saw two men standing by the fence, talking in low tones. She froze. They hadn't seen her yet. She didn't know what to do. Her first thought was to run to the house, but her legs felt like stone. One of the men turned and spotted her. "There she is," he said. Maylin took a step back, her breath quick and shallow. The men walked closer. "We just want to talk," one of them said, holding his hands up. But his smile did not reach his eyes. Before they could get any closer, a shout rang out across the field. "Step away from her!" Thomas came riding in fast, dust flying behind his horse. He jumped down and stood between Maylin and the men, his presence solid and unmovable. "This is your last warning," he said. "Leave my land." The men looked at each other, then back at Thomas. After a moment, they backed away, muttering under their breath. Thomas didn't move until they were gone. Maylin felt her knees weaken, and she sat down on the ground. Thomas knelt beside her, his voice softer now. "You're safe," he said. "Promise." She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. She nodded even though part of her still felt the echo of fear. Bad. That night, Thomas sat at the table long after Maylin went to bed. He thought about the risks he was taking. He thought about the ranch, about the quiet life he had tried to protect. He realized that his life had already changed, whether he wanted it to or not. Maylin lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about running, about disappearing before she caused more trouble. But then she thought about the way Thomas had stood in front of her, without hesitation, without fear. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt like she mattered. The next morning, she found Thomas outside, staring at the horizon. She walked up beside him and, in simple words, said, "I stay. If you want Thomas looked at her, surprised. Then he nodded. I want. The sun rose higher, bathing the land in light. The world beyond the ranch was still full of questions and dangers, but in that moment they stood together, choosing the path ahead, even if they did not know where it would lead. The turning point had come. Break. Their quiet life was no longer just about survival. It was about standing for each other, no matter what waited beyond the fields. The days after the men came to the ranch felt heavy, like the air before a storm that refused to break. The sky stayed clear and blue, but inside the house, both Maylin and Thomas carried a quiet tension that never fully left. Thomas worked harder than ever. He fixed every loose board on the fence, sharpened his tools, and kept his horse close, even when he went out to check the far fields. He told himself he was just being careful, but deep down he knew he was preparing for something he hoped would never come. Maylin noticed everything. She saw the way Thomas paused before leaving the house, the way he looked back at her as if memorizing her face. She saw how he slept lighter at night, waking at the smallest sound. She wanted to help, but she did not know how. So she did the only thing she could. She tried to make the house feel warmer. She cleaned the shelves, swept the floors, and even planted a small row of flowers near the porch using seeds she found in a box in the barn. The flowers were simple and small, but they brought color to the quiet land. Every morning she watered them carefully, as if they were something fragile that needed protection. One evening, Thomas noticed them. He stopped in his tracks and stared at the small line of green and yellow by the porch. Those weren't there before, he said. Maylin shook her head. For happy, she said, placing her hand over her heart. Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't say anything, but something inside him softened. That night, as they sat at the table, Thomas finally spoke about Anna. She loved flowers, he said quietly. Used to plant them everywhere. Bay said they made the land feel alive.
Maylin listened closely. She had heard the name before, but this was the first time Thomas had spoken about her for more than a few words.
Bay. His voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story.
She was kind, he continued.
Bay. Stronger than anyone I knew. Maylin thought about the way Thomas stood in front of her at the barn. She nodded. You... Same, she said. Thomas gave a small, sad smile. Bay.
As the days passed, the town did not stay quiet. Whispers traveled on the wind, carried by people who liked to talk more than they liked to understand.
Some said Thomas was hiding something. Others said Maylin didn't belong there. One afternoon, a neighbor named Mr. Collins rode up to the fence. He was an older man, with a slow way of speaking and tired eyes. "Thomas!" he called out. "Mind if I have a word?" Thomas walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. "What's on your mind, Mr. Best?" Collins looked toward the house where Maylin stood in the doorway. "People are talking," he said gently. "You might want to be careful." Thomas stiffened. Talking doesn't change what's right. Collins nodded. "I know. Just didn't want you to be caught off guard." After he left, Thomas felt the weight of the world pressed down on him. He had lived most of his life trying to avoid trouble, trying to keep his world small and simple. Now, without meaning to, he had stepped into something much bigger. That evening, Maylin sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, It reminded her of the sunsets back home. She closed her eyes and remembered her mother's face, her father's quiet smile, the sound of her village at night. The memories came with both comfort and pain. Thomas sat beside her, saying nothing. They didn't need words. Later that night, the sound of a horse broke the silence. Thomas was on his feet in an instant. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. A man stood near the fence, his face hidden in the shadows. "What do you want?" Thomas called out. The man stepped forward. It was the same one from the market. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "There are people who won't stop asking." Thomas felt his anger rise, but he kept his voice calm. "Then they'll keep hearing no." The man shook his head. "You can't protect her forever." Before Thomas could respond, the man turned his horse and rode off into the dark. Mei Lin had watched from the doorway. Her hands trembled slightly. She felt like a storm was getting closer, no matter how hard Thomas tried to push it away. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the small table and wrote a letter in her own language. She didn't know if it would ever reach her family, but writing their names made her feel less alone. When Thomas found her there, he didn't ask what she was writing. He simply placed a cup of warm tea beside her. The next day, trouble came in a different way. Thomas went into town to pick up supplies, leaving Mei Lin at the ranch. The hours passed slowly. She worked in the garden, fed the animals, and tried to keep her mind busy. Then she heard voices again. Her heart dropped. She looked toward the road and saw two figures walking up the path. They were not neighbors. They moved with purpose. Mei Lin's first thought was to hide. She slipped inside the house and locked the door, her breath quick and shallow. A knock came, loud and firm. "Open up!" a voice called. "We just want to talk!" Mei Lin didn't move. The knock came again, harder this time. The door rattled slightly. She backed away, her hands shaking. Psst. Her mind raced. She thought about running out the back, but she knew they might be waiting. Just as panic threatened to take over, she heard the sound of hooves. Thomas rode in fast, his face set with determination. "Bess," he shouted. The men turned, surprised. They exchanged a few quick words, then backed off, disappearing down the road. Thomas stood there for a long moment, his chest rising and falling. Mei Lin opened the door slowly. When she saw Thomas, she felt a rush of relief so strong her legs nearly gave out. "I don't want you to be scared here," Thomas said quietly. "This is supposed to be your home." She looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I am scared," she admitted. "But I am not alone." Those words hit Thomas harder than anything else had. That evening they sat together and talked more than they ever had before. Slowly, with simple words and patient listening, they shared pieces of their pasts. Mei Lin spoke of her village, her family, and the promises that led her away. Thomas spoke of Anna, of the years they spent building the ranch together, and the emptiness he felt after she was gone. They realized that in different ways they had both lost their homes. As the fire crackled in the stove, something shifted between them. The fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing in the room. Best, there was understanding now. There was connection. Outside, the wind moved through the fields, carrying the scent of grass and earth. The world beyond the ranch was still uncertain. still full of people who did not understand their choice. But inside the small house, two broken paths had crossed, and something stronger had begun to grow in the space between them. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. They knew there would be more whispers, more challenges, and more moments of doubt. But as they sat side by side sharing the quiet warmth of the fire, they also knew one simple truth. The morning light came softly, like it did not want to disturb the quiet that had settled over the ranch. The sky was pale blue, and the air carried the fresh smell of grass and earth. Mei Lin stepped outside and took a deep breath. The world felt calm again, even though she knew the calm was something they had to protect. Thomas was already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked tired, but there was something steady in his eyes that had not been there before. "Morning," he said. Mei Lin smiled. "Morning!" They sat together in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up. Birds moved through the trees, and a horse snorted softly in the barn. It was a simple kind of peace, but it felt real. That day, they decided to visit Mr. Collins. Thomas believed it was time to stop hiding from the town. He knew that fear grew stronger in silence, and he wanted people to see that Mei Lin was not a secret or a problem. She was just a person, like anyone else. Mei Lin was nervous, but she agreed. She did not want to keep looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. They rode together down the dusty road, the sun warm on their backs. When they reached Mr. Collins's small farm, he greeted them with a surprised look. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Didn't expect to see both of you." Thomas nodded. "We wanted to talk." They sat on wooden chairs under a tree, and Thomas spoke openly. He told Mr. Collins about Mei Lin's journey, about how she had come to the ranch, and about his choice to protect her. Mei Lin listened, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the tone. It was honest. Mr. Collins leaned back and sighed. "People fear what they don't know," he said. "But sometimes all it takes is seeing things with their own eyes." That gave Thomas an idea. The following week, they invited a few neighbors to the ranch. Nothing fancy. Just a simple meal and a chance to talk. Mei Lin helped prepare food, using both what she remembered from home and what she had learned in her new life. When the neighbors arrived, they were cautious at first. They stood in small groups, unsure of what to say. Mei Lin stayed close to Thomas, her heart beating fast. But then something simple happened. One of the children ran up to the flowers by the porch and pointed. "Look," he said. They're pretty." Mei Lin smiled and knelt down, showing him how to touch the petals gently. The child laughed, and soon the tension in the air began to fade. People started talking. They asked Mei Lin where she was from. They asked Thomas about the ranch. Stories were shared, small and simple, but honest. By the end of the afternoon, the ranch felt warmer, fuller. Not everyone in town changed their minds that day. But some did, and sometimes that was enough to begin. Weeks passed, and the visits from strangers stopped. The whispers in town grew quieter. Life at the ranch slowly returned to a steady rhythm. Mei Lin began teaching Thomas a few words from her language. He stumbled over the sounds, making her laugh. In return, he taught her how to read simple English words from an old book he found in the house. One evening, as they sat at the table practicing, Thomas looked at her and said, "You're part of this place now. You know that, right?" Mei Lin thought for a moment, then nodded. "Psst, this," My home, she said. The word felt strong and true. One day, a letter arrived. It was written in Mei Lin's language. Her hands shook as she opened it. Her family was alive. Brace. They had wondered where she had gone, feared the worst. Someone had carried her letter back across the ocean, and now, after all this time, they had written back. Tears filled her eyes as she read. Thomas watched quietly, giving her space. That night, Mei Lin told him what the letter said in simple words. They miss me, she said. They... happy I live. Thomas nodded. I'm glad they know you're safe. She looked at him. Because of you. The seasons began to change. The fields turned golden, and the air grew cooler. The ranch felt different now. Lighter. Fuller. Thomas found himself laughing more. Mei Lin found herself singing softly as she worked, songs from her home mixing with the sounds of the land around her. One afternoon, Thomas took Mei Lin to a small hill that overlooked the ranch. From there, they could see everything they had built together. He cleared his throat.
When Anna was alive, he said, we used to come here, talk about the future.
Mei Lin listened, her heart steady. I thought I didn't have a future anymore, he continued. Not one that meant anything. He turned to her. But now I do. Mei Lin felt her chest tighten with emotion. She didn't need big words to understand what he meant. She placed her hand over his. Future, she said simply. Thomas smiled, and for the first time in a long while, the smile reached his eyes. The town slowly began to see them not as something strange, but as part of the land. Mei Lin helped at the market. Thomas worked with neighbors to fix roads and fences. Their lives became woven into the community. One day, Mr. Collins stopped by and laughed.
Never thought I'd see the day this place felt so lively, he said. Thomas looked around at the flowers, the clean porch, and Mei Lin waving to a passerby. Bask. Neither did I, he replied. As the year came to an end, they celebrated a small festival at the ranch. Lanterns were hung, food was shared, and people from town came to join. Mei Lin taught the children a simple dance from her home, and Thomas played music on an old instrument he hadn't touched in years. Desperating. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now full of light and sound. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Thomas and Mei Lin sat on the porch, watching the lanterns flicker in the dark. You know, Thomas said. I offered my name that day because I didn't want you to be alone. Mei Lin looked at him. You were alone too. He nodded. Guess we saved each other. Race. The stars filled the sky just like they had on her first night at the ranch. But everything felt different now. The fear, the doubt, and the pain were still part of their story, but they were no longer the whole story. Mei Lin thought about the long road she had traveled, the promises that had led her away from home, and the unexpected path that had brought her here. Thomas thought about the quiet house, the loss he had carried, and the new life that had slowly grown in the empty spaces. They sat together, two lives from different worlds, now sharing the same horizon. The future was still unknown. There would still be hard days, questions, and challenges. But as the lanterns glowed and the wind moved gently through the fields, one thing felt certain. They were no longer just surviving.
They were living.